Well, welcome everyone. My name is Ann Tapia. I'm with the Ohio Department of Developmental Disabilities Community Life Engagement Team. Really excited to be part of the Fear Factor team. This is an amazing crew. We do have a little disclaimer that we wanted to just remind you that it is really important while we're going to share general information today, when we're talking about benefits, it must be individualized and personalized to the specifics of each individual person. So, we highly recommend that you take what you can from this session and from other fear factors, but follow up with really personalized information with a benefits planner. And so you can see our legal statement there and the very important blah, blah, blah. We hope that we know that you all enjoy these sessions and we want to be as informative as we can, and just keep in mind that is as much as we can give in such a general way.
Yes, thanks, Anna. I guess in these times we just have to be careful, right? Way too much information sometimes, and it's very confusing.
So our plan for today, we're doing a little bit of the housekeeping now, laying the groundwork for the context of what these sessions intend to cover. We'll get into the meat of this topic today, what to do when things go wrong, and then we'll wrap up with some Q&A. And we are, from a logistics standpoint, want to give you the heads up, we're going to hold the Q&A to the very end. Unless if somebody has something that is like clarification in the moment, probably makes sense to just do in the moment. We will otherwise just collect those Q&A questions. So please do drop them in your Q&A box. Feel free to use the chat for comments and feedback and those kinds of things. But for the questions, if you could put them in that Q&A box, that would help us to make sure that when we get to the end of the session, we make sure we address the questions that you have. We do want to remind you that if it is really specific to a personal situation, we may not be able to answer that in this large group format. We might need more information to really be helpful and provide specific answers. So we will gladly connect offline and talk in a more individualized way to help address and support the questions that you may have if they are that specific.
Okay, we're going to share the poll. We got a poll as usual with the fear factor. We always want to find out who's in the room. So we're going to kick it off right now with who's here, and I'm going to launch that poll. So if you guys can let us know your role in attending today. I know many of you probably have multiple roles similar to myself. I don't know what I am. I guess I'm an other. I'm maybe county board staff, but not really. And then I'm also a parent of a person, so family member. So just do your best at answering those, and we will share back out so you all know who is in the room. Just a reminder while you're finishing this, if you have a global question that is just about the topic, you can use the Q&A that's in the bottom. Before you ask your question in the Q&A, make sure and look at other people's questions, and maybe you just say thumbs up to one of somebody else's because it's the same question. If you just want to chat or give feedback, the chat box is fine, but any questions should go in the Q&A. All right, well, we have about 85% of the people answering, so we're going to go ahead and share out the results so we all know who's in the room today. I've got about 75% of the people in the room are service and support administrators, 126 out of you. Another 20% is other county board staff. We have lots of related county board staff that are very interested in employment and doing wonderful things to help with employment. So thank you and benefits. Thank you so much for being here. And it looks like we have a family member. Woo woo! And it looks like we have somebody living with a disability. We have a few providers in the room. We have some folks from the Opportunities for Ohioans with Disabilities, otherwise known as OOD. And we have a few people from the Ohio Department of DD in the room. So thank you so much for being here. And we're always looking for ways to get this information out to a larger group. So feel free, if you have a parent group or a provider group that you would like Fear Factor to present to, you can contact Ann or myself, and we would love to present more broadly. I
All
think that's
right, so fear factor is an acronym, of course. We need acronyms, right? No, the idea of fear factor started because we know that there's a lot of fears that are out there for people who are considering employment, and there's a lot of people who worry they're going to lose their benefits. And so, what we want to do in these sessions is to confront those fears with facts, evaluation, action, and get to results in which people move past fears and move into employment. So the purpose is that we provide resources and information and access to experts because, like we said, this is going to be some information that you can take and use, but you also need to know who to contact for that next level support so you can individualize it to the specifics and what each person is experiencing and what their employment opportunities might be to really get a better picture about what benefits might look like based on employment opportunities. So we want to make sure that this is accessible to SSAs, all of you who are out there, to the job seekers and employees with developmental disabilities, to families and other supporters, and really anybody who might be interested in this conversation. We all have to address the fears that we have about working and how that impacts benefits with confidence. So, today's session is talking about what to do when things go wrong, but Fear Factor has covered a number of other sessions, including benefits analysis, stable accounts, SSI, SSDI, ticket to work, Medicaid buy-in for workers with disabilities, reporting requirements, and more. So, we want to encourage you to watch all of the episodes. Sit down. I like to joke that this is a great binge-worthy show, right? So, check it out. Watch all the ones if you have missed an episode or need to refresh your memory. Those are all available. We want to give you a sneak preview of a brand new way to access resources where we have collected as many of the resources through these sessions as we can. And you can go ahead and go to the next slide because we've revamped the Fear Factor webpage. I'm going to drop these links in the chat here in just a moment so that it kind of streamlines the information on this page, and the QR code will take you to, it's the same link for Fear Factor. But if you click in, there's one of those little tiles on there that says Fear Factor Padlet. And if you click into that, if you go to the next slide, you'll see we have a brand new Padlet page which looks like um, the next slide, maybe. I can see you diligently trying to get there. So this QR code will take you to that Padlet, and this is where you'll now find all of the episodes, which we have organized by category. So whatever the topic is, you'll find the episode, the handouts, and then any of the resources and links that we share throughout those episodes. So we will continue to update this on a regular basis. It does get a little bit more fluid for us that we can change those and add to those resources a little bit more quickly. So we're very excited to launch this to you all. Bookmark it, check back frequently as we continue to update the resources. We know this is a changing landscape in these moments, so we want to make sure that as much as we can, we have the most accurate and up-to-date information available to you all. So the Padlet, the Fear Factor Padlet, will be where we are dropping all of that good information to keep you informed.
all right. Well, thanks so much, Anne. I'm going to go ahead and do our next poll because, today we're talking about when things go wrong. And so we want to find out from your perspective, how many times have you received a request for help when things go wrong with benefits? We've got never, less than 3 to 5 times, or at least 1 time per week. And then we also have a second follow-up question, which is how confident are you that you know how to help when things go wrong with benefits? So I'm going to give you guys a chance to fill that out. I'm liking the original thoughts I'm seeing. It seems like it might be a little bit more popular than, actually not more popular, as popular as we thought that it might be. It's often when an SSA will find, we do get the context, is that things are going poorly. So I'm going to give it a couple more seconds to get your answers in there. Anne is dropping the links to both the Employment First webpage, which has our Fear Factor page on there, and then also the Padlet that she just showed you. So make sure you bookmark those so that you can go back and see things when you need them. All right, I'm going to go ahead and end the poll and let's see what everybody's thinking here. Share the results out. So, how many times have you received a request for help when things go wrong with benefits? It looks like the overwhelming answer is at least 3 to 5 times. And then the next one was less than 3 times. So there you go. And then at least 1 time per week. That must have been my answer, by the way. I know that I was so thankful that we had Margaret Dramzik in Lucas County when I would get those phone calls and I could go and talk to her. And she's one of our Fear Factor panelists now. All right. And then the second question was, how confident are you that you know how to help when things do go wrong with benefits? All right. So we got the most people said somewhat confident, right? Like, I know to call Margaret or Kim Bernardi or Christine, like that's about what I know, right? There's also a few confident people. I like that. I'm so glad that you guys are feeling confident, and beware of answering extremely confident, which 2 people answered, because those are the people that we might be reaching out to be part of our Fear Factor group. So, but we also had 28 people, or 18%, said not at all confident. So between the not at all confident and somewhat confident, we certainly hope that we are able to help a bit today with the session. All right.
So,
Yeah, you're going to take over, Anne.
yeah, just a slight adjustment to today's plan. We are grateful that we have both Paula, Cindy, and Nate here today. Unfortunately, Margaret is sick today, so she was extremely helpful in the planning of today's session, except all you see is the behind the scenes work that she did for the session and not her lovely face and input in the actual overview today. So, um, these are our superstars that you'll hear more from in a moment. But we can't do any of this without the incredible Fear Factor team behind the scenes. So the growing list that you see here are the additional folks who will be helping out in the Q&A and in the chat, and are just critical in the planning of these sessions and making sure we've got the right experts who are present to give the information that we need. So we'll pass it over to our superstars for today.
Superstar is just such a serious word there, and I don't like that. But thank you, Anne and Lisa, for those wonderful words this morning. Guess it's afternoon. How about that? It's been a day. So we wanted to kind of start by going through what are the most common things that go wrong. And as we were planning this session, I thought, man, that just sounds so terrible, right? Like what to do when things go wrong. We probably should have called it like how to make sure things go right if we wanted to think a little bit more positively. But we'll go through all this stuff to kind of help.
We go for the drama on Fear Factor, Paula.
That's
Why do you
true.
think we call it
It's
Fear
true.
Factor? Like,
how do we get people to watch us? I know, right? Yeah. So, but anyway, we wanted to talk about these are the most common things that go wrong, and then why do they go wrong, and then what we can do to kind of prevent things from going wrong the best we can in this crazy, wonderful world that we live in nowadays. So, just from being a benefit specialist over the past so many years, can't even keep track of how many it's been. But the things that I see, and Margaret agreed with me and Cindy agreed, that go wrong is mostly a failure to report information in a timely manner. When people are getting benefits, it's very important to communicate with the agencies that you're getting benefits from. And so that sometimes is the most common thing that goes wrong, is not sending in paperwork or just failing to report changes that need to be reported in a timely manner. If somebody's on a needs-based program, I've seen where a lot of times going over those resource limits or not keeping a good eye on those resource limits and assets can cause things to go wrong with those more needs-based programs, which we're going to talk about what is needs-based. Income. When income changes, that needs to be reported to agencies, such as, housing agencies, job and family services, and Social Security. So people need to report when there's changes in income. And so going over those limits could cause some major issues to go wrong. And then not reporting work incentives or assistance that somebody might need for employment. And we're not going to go like super in depth into what the work incentives are today, but we're going to talk about some reporting that could be done for work incentives today. So, and these are the most common things that do go wrong when it comes to benefits. So on the next slide, I have Margaret's beautiful house that she and Nate created together. And so this house kind of shows the difference between benefits when it comes to Social Security. So we're going to spend a lot of time today focusing on Social Security benefits, just because that's the biggest chunk of where things go wrong. But this house just kind of shows the Social Security Administration is one agency, but they house many different benefits. So on the one side of the house, the blue side, we have Title II benefits, which are also known as Social Security Disability Insurance, or SSDI. Social Security calls them Title II. If you're ever talking to a Social Security employee, they might refer to those benefits as such. And under those benefits, you have somebody can collect benefits through a parent. If they're collecting and eligible for disability benefits before the age of 22, by meeting Social Security's medical rules for disability, they can collect through a parent. And that's known as childhood disability benefits, or CDB. Formerly, it was known as disabled adult child benefits, or DAC. So you might hear those terms kind of used interchangeably. Today, they're called CDB, but Social Security employees still call them DAC or DAC benefits. So that would be someone collecting through a parent work record. And then if somebody is collecting from their own work record that they've paid and worked in, had Social Security taxes taken out of their paychecks, that's called Social Security Disability Insurance, or SSDI. And so that would be where somebody is insured enough to collect through those work records. So Medicare comes with these benefits over here on that left side, or the blue side of the house, after 24 months or 2 years of being on those benefits. And those benefits are usually paid out on the 3rd of the month to folks. Because, sometimes people don't know that they're collecting through a work record. They just think they're getting SSI. And that's where a lot of issues come along when it comes to benefits, because people don't know what program they're collecting through. So that's the one side of the house. And there's folks in Social Security that kind of just handle those benefits. And then we have the other side of the house, which is the needs-based supplemental security income, or SSI program, also known as Title 16. So this is the means-tested program that's paid to individuals strictly based on financial need. So it has a $2,000 resource limit for an individual and a $3,000 married couple asset limit. And then ABLE accounts, or stable accounts, in the state of Ohio are the exception to that resource limit. They don't count up to $100,000 towards that limit. And an individual who gets SSI can own a home that's in their name that they live in, and they can have a car that's in their name that they're using for transportation. And so this amount just varies depending on who is collecting, based on other income that they have coming in. So it's important, when I first said, it's important to report changes in resources and income, this is what we're talking about. For SSI folks, that plays a huge, huge part. And this person in SSI land will also get Medicaid in the state of Ohio, because we are a state where that comes automatically now with eligibility. Nate, is there anything you want to add to this house slide? Because I know you created this with Margaret. So if you're able and want to add anything, feel free.
Yeah, I can certainly try. Can you all hear me?
We can.
Okay, good. I think you gave a really great general overview. One of the most important things, that Margaret and I identified early on was communicating the differences between supplemental security income and Social Security disability insurance programs as being really the critical piece to starting the conversation. And that if folks came into the conversation knowing what benefits they had, it would make it easier to navigate, using the various work incentives.
Absolutely, Nate. And that is often why things go wrong, because people don't understand what benefits they are getting. And that's where, those benefit analysis come into play to verify, what exactly the benefits are that someone's receiving. Thank you, Nate. On my next
You're
slide,
welcome.
it's kind of a mess. I think it's important though, because this is my key to figuring out what people receive is to look at the letters that someone gets from Social Security. So if you as an SSA are meeting with a family and they're like, "Oh, I got this letter and I don't know what it means." The first place you need to look on these letters is in the top left corner. And this is just a copy of a whole bunch of top left corners of letters. And I put this on here because it'll show you the difference. So the first one, they'll all say Social Security Administration at the top. That's common on all of them. But the big difference is, does it say Retirement Survivors and Disability Insurance, or does it say Supplemental Security Income? So that will tell you what benefits someone is getting. It'll tell you, some people get both. If they have a whole stack of letters and some say Retirement Survivor Disability Insurance, that means they're getting either a benefit through themselves or through a parent. But then they also might have some letters that say Supplemental Security Income. And that means they're getting both. So it's very important. A lot of times, the key to making sure you know what's happening is looking at the letters. And then the other part of this is that under that part where it says Retirement Survivors and Disability Insurance or Supplemental Security Income, it'll tell you what's happening. So you'll see this first one at the top says important information. So that just means they're telling you something. They have information to share with you about what's going on with your benefits. This one that says Supplemental Security Income, it has a notice of award. That's the initial letter someone gets when they're found eligible for benefits. That's a very exciting letter to see because they have a lot of information. They usually are quite long, depending on how long it takes someone to be found eligible for benefits, but they're very in-depth because if it's an SSI award letter, it'll look at month by month what someone's income looks like, what their resources look like, and it'll give you calculation sheets and like show you how they figured that amount out. And then there's some that say notice of change in payment. These are the ones that come a whole lot. They come out monthly, usually for someone who's working and reporting income or that Social Security thinks they're earning income. I've had families who get 3 or 4 letters every single month on SSI with notices of change in payment. This next one, it's notice of disability cessation. If anyone ever shows you that letter, we need to do something. That's a very scary letter. And I've actually seen several of these in the past couple months, not to scare everybody. I guess that's what we're here for, to take the fear out of things, not like give it to you. But we want to do something if we see anything that says notice of disability cessation. Not doing things will make benefits stop. That's what cessation means. It means it's going to stop. So we want to make sure we're acting on those quickly, like as quick as possible. Then you have just a notice of change, like if a benefit amount changed for retirement survivor disability. Notice of proposed decision, that one's less scary as notice of disability cessation, because that just means they're thinking about making a decision and they're giving you time to give them more information. And that's kind of the same as notice of planned action for SSI. Those kind of go along the same lines, like they're planning to make a change, but if you give them more information, they might not make that change. Does that make sense? And then down here in the bottom right, I have one that says notice of overpayment. Nobody ever likes getting one of those letters. But that's kind of what we're here to talk about, like what to do if you see that. So that will be an official notice that will tell you, we overpaid you. This is why you were overpaid. And those letters are so important because they could contain information that might not be accurate. So a lot of times we just need to know that exact notice is the overpayment notice. So reporting is the most important for the needs-based programs out there in the world. And so we wanted to kind of point out that these are the needs-based programs. So we have for Social Security, the SSI, Supplemental Security Income Program, is the needs-based program in SSI or Social Security land. That's the one that's based on that income and resources. So all information regarding resources and income needs to be reported to Social Security. And we're going to go through later, like all the stuff that needs reported, but that's the needs-based program. And then Job and Family Services houses many needs-based programs as well, including Medicaid, food stamps, which is called Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program or SNAP benefits. And then Ohio Work First benefits, which is a Ohio's version of the temporary assistance for needy families. That's a needs-based program. So communication for those programs needs to be ongoing with JFS when you're receiving those benefits in order to make sure things go right. And then the local housing authorities who handle the subsidized housing, they also need to be kept informed of any changes in income and resources because they are also a needs-based program. So we have found that issues typically come out of reviews that happen. And in Social Security, there are SSI reviews that happen, and there are reviews that happen for Social Security disability insurance or those folks collecting through the work records. They're separate, they're different reviews. So in SSI land, what happens is they could do a medical review. So those are called CDRs or continuing disability reviews. And those also happen in SSDI in childhood disability benefit land. So anyone who collects a disability benefit is subject to a medical CDR. And those happen on either a 3-year, 5-year, or 7-year basis. Social Security is who determines how often those are going to happen. And a lot of times, the folks that I work with in the disability, when the disabilities happen earlier in life, when they're younger, those folks often get put into the larger timeframes of the 5 to 7 years for those disability reviews, just because like the change and the medical improvement isn't necessarily expected with those disabilities compared to a different type of disability. So those disability reviews happen so infrequently that people often forget about them. So if they get a packet in the mail that says, we need to review your disability based on medical, it's a continuing disability review, then families need to send that information back because not sending that back could cause that benefit to stop. And nobody wants for that to happen. So those forms come out to the families or the individual's payee, and it just needs to get submitted back with some medical information for Social Security to kind of check and make sure that that disability is still continuing. And then in Social Security, the SSI land, they do financial reviews. So this is where they're looking back to see what income and resources someone has to make sure financially they are still eligible for benefits. So with SSI, they can review a record back 2 years. So that means that if I was getting a review completed today, they could go back 2 years from today and review my record. And so that's why it's very important to make sure you're following the rules. Even when Social Security is not asking you what your resources or your income is, you want to make sure that you follow their rules because they can go back 2 years and review it. And if you were over resources 2 years ago for about 6 months, they're going to find that. And that's where you see those letters of overpayments. So I always remind people to keep an eye on those resources because we want to make sure when that review happens, you're going to be eligible and you're not going to get a scary letter that says you were overpaid. Nobody likes those letters. And then the Social Security Disability Insurance or SSDI and Childhood Disability Benefits reviews, they can also do a work review. And this review can go back to the date of entitlement. So that means if I was found entitled to benefits in 1996, they can say, hey, we need to review your work record all the way back to 1996. Now, clearly, I'm so young that I was not working in 1996, but they could do that if I was working in 1996. So that's why it's important for people to realize that work changes need to be reported. And usually, if Social Security sees IRS reports of earnings for someone, it's going to trigger them to do that work review. But I know that myself, and I know Margaret, Cindy, I think we talked about her. She's seen some crazy ones too, where they go back a pretty significant chunk of time um, to look at that work review. Nate, do you want to add anything about how that review can go back to the date of entitlement?
Yeah, I certainly can. I know in my case, I've received every one of the letters that you indicated on the previous page at various steps of my journey and dealings with the Social Security Administration. And um, I would say that it's really important to read the letters carefully and to keep as best as possible thorough documentation of maybe time slips and pay stubs and any accommodations you might have on the job and any medical expenses, because you can submit those to Social Security and have them re-review their decision because it could change. Um, I don't know if that was what you wanted me to answer, and I'm kind of losing parts of the audio, so hopefully that was helpful.
Nate, every word you say is always helpful. I appreciate it.
Okay.
Oh,
um,
look, Christine has her hand up too. I think she wanted to jump in.
Go for it, Christine.
I would say this too. You see, some of these Social Security offices will not give you, they only want to give your, if you are like B126 or whatever number, they will just put a stamp on it to say they got it. Well, what I do, and they will not do it for you, so you have to be an advocate and ask for the name and their employee identification number for evidence, because the thing is, I have gone in there, so I get record who collected my record. So if they said anything like, no, we didn't collect it, well, here's the page, here's the name, here's the employee number, who collected it. So that's on you guys then. So pointing out, make some kind of sheet that's saying, and I did this, like Christine, gave my pay stubs to blank and put their name, who is employee number is blank at the Social Security office at this location, and put your address, the address of that location. And then you have more evidence than they will ever have to show that you are an advocate to fight and say, I know it because I saw it. And so I wanted to point that out.
Absolutely. Thank you, Christine. And it is very important, not just when you go in the office, but you can write it down. Get yourself a handy dandy little notebook and just write down who you're talking to when you talk to them, because then it becomes a document you could supply to Social Security if needed. And I've had to go back years and say, we went to your office, we talked to this person. So yes, very, very good. Thank you,
Yeah.
Christine. And again, we wanted to kind of go through a lot of people that get SSI and Medicaid, they don't realize the difference between income versus resources. So I think this is something that goes wrong a lot, is that people don't realize what these actual Social Security rules mean. So income is money that is received. It's my income. It's money I have coming in during a month. And I can have either earned income or I can have unearned income. And earned income is money that I'm actively working and getting through a paycheck. And unearned income would be money that's just coming to me every single month. So if I'm unemployed and I file for unemployment and I'm not actively working, that's unearned income. Or if I'm a person who gets SSDI and SSI, my SSDI is unearned income. So that's income, money that comes into the house every single month, or into my individual. And then resources are assets that I own and that have a value. There are like a whole bunch that don't count, but we're not going to go through all of that today. But resources are just things that I have that I could basically convert to cash. I could sell a boat. I own a boat. I could sell it. I could convert it to cash. It counts as a resource for me. At the moment, I actually am in a weird situation where I have 2 cars. Me, as one individual person, per SSI rules, I shouldn't have 2 cars. They would count the value of my second vehicle as a resource. So those are just a couple examples. And then income counts in the month it's received for SSI and Medicaid purposes. So if I get paid on the 1st of the month, it counts in that month I got it. So on the 1st of September counts as September income. Even though I worked in August, that money came to me in September, so it counts as income in September for SSI purposes. And then any of the income that you had coming in that's left over at the end of the month carrying over into the next month would count as a resource. So income could turn into a resource at the end of a month. So that is just a good way to think of that. The other thing that we found is that when you're on SSI, and I call Social Security and say, hi, I get SSI. I started a new job. I'm working this many hours per week. They're going to put on my record that I have income coming in, and they're going to base it off of what I told them. And so from then on, they're going to give me an estimate on my record of income that they think I'm going to get. And this also applies for unearned income, like child support that I get. If I tell the office I'm getting child support, they're going to put it on there. And it's going to always say, Paula gets child support and this is how much she's getting, until I send them proof that I'm not getting it. And then earned income will also count. They'll put an estimate. If I say I'm working 25 hours a week, I'm going to earn $15 an hour. They're going to do a little bit of calculations and they're going to put that on there. So if my schedule changes or if I'm off, because something happened and I needed a week off, then that estimate could actually be higher than what I'm actually receiving. So those estimates stay on the record until Social Security sees proof that they aren't received. So I wanted to give you a crazy little example of some actual letters for an SSI person. And this is a fun example of how this person has gotten 4 letters in almost a 1-month time frame. So I highlighted the important parts. These are all SSI letters. And the fun thing is, this important information was always found on page 2. Isn't that fun how they put it on page 2 and not on page 1, where everybody gets sick of reading the letter at the bottom of page 1. They don't want to keep going to page 2. But this is the most important part. So in a letter dated May 3rd of this year, somebody got a letter and it said, this is what your benefit's going to be. And it's based on an estimate of wages for April of $490.94. And then 10 days later, they got another letter saying, hey, we verified your wages of $513 for March and $654 for April, right? So now not only does it change your SSI amount, but it also could change amounts for past months. When you send in those pay stubs and they're verifying those wages, it changes the payment. So this estimate for April was actually a little bit low. So if they wouldn't have actually seen the pay stubs, that's how it could have resulted in an overpayment. And then, they continue to keep getting these letters every single month. And May 31st, they got a letter saying, we're estimating your wages for May. And then in June, they still got a letter saying, we estimated your wages for May. So these letters are so important to read. And it's so important to look at the difference between estimated and verified in these SSI letters. So anytime someone comes to you with an SSI letter, make sure you go and you look to the little box that says information used in making this decision, because that's where it's going to tell you, is this an estimate or is this a verified amount of wages? And so Social Security will keep those estimates on there until they actually verify those wages. And those verifications should be happening after someone on the first big part of the month sends in those pay stubs. Sound good? Does it all make sense? My crazy slides, they're a little bit crazy, but I think it's important just to see that's the big difference in those letters. The estimates stay there until they're changed into verified. And if we would have followed this along a little longer, we probably would have seen, okay, they eventually changed that estimate to a verified, but it took a little bit of time for them to process that information. Oh, the other thing we wanted to point out on this slide is that SSI is a program that they can't like stay on top of things in the moment because we're guessing what people are earning. So your payment for September can't be 100% accurately based on what your income is of September. So with the SSI program, they actually have a 2-month retro rule where they're looking at income from 2 months previous to figure out that benefit. So wages for the month of April indicate what your June payment is going to be. And I think that's another thing that a lot of people get confused about when it comes to SSI benefits, because the Social Security office needs that income for April to be reported and updated in their system so then they can figure out what that June payment is. So people need to think about that when they're starting and stopping jobs, because I have folks who say, oh, I don't want to work there anymore. Done, right? I stopped working. But I don't think about how, oh no, my SSI payment for September isn't going to be based on me just quitting my job. It's going to be based on my income from 2 months previous. So it's going to take time for my SSI to catch back up. And people don't think about that. I don't think about that. It's a Social Security rule for SSI though, so it's important for folks to realize. And that's why that income reporting monthly is so important, to get these estimates changed to verified. And there's many situations where I've seen people get underpaid because that estimate is too high that's on their record. So then once they see it, they actually get extra money issued to them. So it can go the other way too, that things go wrong where someone doesn't get the payments that they're supposed to get. Instead of getting too much money, they might not be getting enough money, which is really, really important. Living arrangement. Cindy, do you want to talk to us about a living arrangement for SSI?
I can. Can you hear me okay?
We can.
Awesome. So SSI, thank you for Paula for kind of explaining the SSI requirements for reporting. And so because this area is looked at very closely and what you receive, and SSI is based on your living arrangements. SSI in this case, when you're living with your parents, and we're kind of talking about when the individual is 18 and older and not necessarily if they're receiving Social Security as a minor. So if you're 18 and older and you're living with your family, you do have to show if you're receiving Social Security in any capacity that you are paying for your own living expenses. And that is by a calculation. So you would report, you or your payee or your guardian would report to Social Security what those living expenses are, how many people are living in the home, what your utilities are, your shelter, housing, that kind of thing. And then they want to know how many people are living in the home. And that's how they come up with a share expense on what the individual receiving Social Security would be responsible as what their living expenses are. And so when it says that, that's where we get this year living expense. So as 18, you must start paying for your own living expenses. That is through your, when you're 18, through your 18th birthday, not the day of 18, but when you're 18 plus 30 days, that's when Social Security considers you an adult to be contributing to your living expenses. In order to receive the full benefit, you do need to show proof to Social Security that you would be contributing to those living expenses as determined by what you would be reporting to Social Security. And I did see a question coming through where someone stated if the parent is providing some of those expenses on behalf of the individual, that would be considered in kindness. So because your Social Security would be considered on those living expenses, if a parent or a family member is covering the cost of some of those, maybe utilities or shelter, then your full benefit would be reduced to reflect that you're not paying for your full share of expenses for those months. Did I cover that? Paula, do you have anything else you wanted to?
No, you did a great job. Thank you. So often people wonder, like, how do they figure out how much their portion of the living expenses should be? And so this is a form that I use because this is what Social Security looks at. And it's not a form everyone has to fill out. It's just a helpful form to make sure that, that individual is actually paying their share. But the household expenses that Social Security looks at are the mortgage or the rent that the family pays to live where they're living. And they should include insurance and taxes in that mortgage if it's not already. I've had some families who actually don't have a mortgage, but they just have insurance and taxes, so that amount would go there. And then what is your electric bill average, over the course of a year per month? And then what is your water and sewer? What is your gas? What is your trash? So those are the big things that Social Security is looking at. And then they're going to look at how many people are in the household to figure out what that person's share should be. So again, this isn't a needed form. It's just a helpful form if a family is like trying to figure out what should I charge my 18-year-old. Because obviously you don't want to overcharge them, but also you have to show that they're paying their fair share of those expenses. So I just find it very helpful. Families find it helpful. And I always run into the families who like pull out all their electric bills and they're like adding them up and doing an accurate total, but you can kind of average in your head what you think your bill is throughout the year. Because it's sometimes, more maybe in the summer when I have my air conditioning on than it is in the winter when I have my gas heat on. And then I always use this number that I get from my little spreadsheet over here to come up with a rental agreement. And I think the important thing to know is if the 18-year-old has a guardian, they can't legally sign a rental agreement. So then that information would just need to be conveyed to Social Security verbally. But if they are their own, guardian, they can sign a rental agreement. And so they can use that number to put how much their rent is going to be per month on that little rental agreement form. So we are going to dive into like what are these limited resources. Cindy, do you want to share more about what are limited resources?
Yes, so if you're receiving SSI, your resource in total, and that would be cumulative. So if you have a checking and a savings account or other resources that are countable, it would be $2,000 for an individual or be $3,000 as a couple. And that doesn't mean that you only can have $2,000 in total. There's other options like federally protected trust funds or ABLE accounts that allows the person to have resources and assets that exceed what Social Security would allow that would be protected for them. And so, as Paula had mentioned, some of those are great options to look into, so someone doesn't always have to stay under the 2,000 limit. They would in their bank accounts and those countable resources, but they could have assets spread out that are protected. And like the chart shows, when we talk about cash, it's not just cash, but debit cards, those also count because those do have a cash value. And so you'll see on some of those documentations from Social Security, they might ask you if there's any debit cards that they have, and that's where you would report what you have in income on those debit cards as well. And then the bank accounts would be the checking and savings account for the individual. Of course, the land, the individual can own that. It would be anything beyond just the initial land that they are residing in. Vehicles, as Paula stated, every individual can own one vehicle, but this would be anything above that one vehicle for that person that they could sell and turn into immediate liquidation in cash. Same thing for personal property as in a home and life insurances as well. Some life insurance policies that you can cash in would be considered something you could liquidate immediately and therefore have in cash, and other insurance policies may be considered not countable. But it's really important that you report all of this information to Social Security so they can make that determination based on their rules and regulations, what they would count as something that would be a countable resource or an asset.
Thank you, Cindy.
Hey,
Paula?
Cindy.
Oh.
We are hearing from people that your mic volume is really low. I don't know if it's possible for you to check your
Okay.
settings and see if you can turn it up so people can hear you a little better. And then we've just been suggesting that people turn
Yeah.
their volume up
Mhm.
if they're finding it hard to hear Cindy.
I can do
Sorry for
that.
the interruption.
No, and I might have a headset I can grab too, if that would help.
It might. Thank you, Cindy.
Yeah.
So Social Security does have a list of specific resources that do not count. So I think it's important for people to realize the things that don't count, but also be cautious because Social Security kind of makes those determinations. And so it is important to still report when you own something that you don't think will count, because they will, in their side, put what does count and what doesn't count. But some of the biggest things that don't count that I've had and people ask about are like wedding and engagement rings. Those don't count, even if they're expensive and they have value. Social Security doesn't count that. It's called a personal effects and household good. My couch doesn't count as a resource, right? They understand you need things. Everybody needs clothes. Everybody needs things in their house to live. And then they don't count burial spaces for you or your immediate family, or burial funds that you or your spouse have that are valued at $1,500 or less, or life insurance policies with a combined face value of $1,500 or less. So those should be getting disqualified as not counting. And then if someone has a pass plan, which we're not going to talk about today, that doesn't count. That's just a specific plan that someone has to achieve self-support through SSI. And then up to $100,000 of funds in an ABLE account do not count through a state ABLE program. The other thing that I have found can get people in trouble during tax refund season, and I run into this a lot with families who maybe have a child getting SSI benefits. Lump sum back payments that are issued, and this is not just for children, but for everybody. If I get a letter saying that SSI underpaid me or they're giving me a back payment, then it doesn't count as a resource for 9 months after I received it. So I just need to kind of keep track of how much of that lump sum I have in my accounts, because Social Security on their side is still just going to get a number saying this is how much we see in your bank account. If it's over 2,000, it might cause a red flag and they'll say, oh, hey, you're over resources. But I've had where I just need to submit for an individual, we're only over resources because you gave me $5,000 in March and it's only May, and I'm allowed to have that for 9 months. So then you just got to kind of send it back to them saying, hey, that's the money you gave me. And I'm allowed to keep it for 9 months. Sometimes the safe thing to do, which we're going to have Nate talk about on the next slide, is just putting it in a stable account. But it can sit in those regular old resource accounts for 9 months after you receive it. And that's a Medicaid rule as well, not just SSI. And then tax refunds. When someone gets a big tax refund, and again, this is the one I see with families, because sometimes families get bigger tax refunds because of kids in the home and those child tax credits that go out. But these tax refunds are excluded from counting towards resources for up to 12 months after they get them. And so I've just had to submit to Social Security proof that the family has $12,000 in their bank account because they got that from a tax refund. It went in the bank on this time, and they're like holding on to it so they can cover their living, some of their things they need for the next year. So the easy solution to that is just send into Social Security proof of when you got that tax refund, and then they'll subtract that from that resource. So the important thing to think about with those tax refunds, it just applies to federal refunds. It doesn't apply to state income tax refunds. So again, this is just where communication comes into play, and sending Social Security that proof of, hey, this is where it came from. This is why I have it. Because, they don't do those reviews as frequently as we think they should, because Social Security gets busy. They're very busy, and extremely understaffed. And so those reviews that happen maybe every year and a half or every so many years for folks, that's sometimes where they see these people over resources. So that's why it's important to kind of self-monitor that you're below those limits to make sure that no big issues come up during that time frame. So those are the important things to remember about lump sum payments and federal tax refunds. And next, we're going to talk about stable accounts. And Nate, I have
Yes,
you down for this because you're the stable guru.
okay, perfect. So stable accounts, well, stable is Ohio's able account, and those are special savings and investment accounts for eligible people with disabilities to save and invest excess resources beyond the $2,000 limit that is required by the Social Security Administration and sometimes Medicaid to remain eligible for some programs. And the key thing to remember is that when people receive money during a month, it's income, but in the next month, any leftover income becomes resources. And so resources are determined at midnight on the first day of the month. And so when Social Security reviews account balances, they do it based on the first day of the month. And so that's really important when thinking about eligibility for SSI in particular, because if you're over that $2,000 amount, you could be ineligible for SSI for a particular month. And so that's partially where stable accounts really are a lifeline for people living with disabilities who want to work and earn and save more money. And up to $100,000 can go into an able account and not count toward that SSI resource limit. And then two, people who work can contribute. So regularly, one can put up to $19,000 in a stable account each year from any source, and that includes other people, a trust, sometimes jobs, and then also for people who work, they can contribute an additional amount of money as well. But wages in a stable account still are reportable wages to the benefits agencies. It only allows people to save more in resources. And stable accounts include many investment options, including a bank safe option for a higher yield savings account. Did I hit all
Excellent.
the high points? Okay.
You did. And I know we're not talking like in depth about stable accounts today, but I know that House Bill 96 did have some recent changes to stable accounts. Nate, do you want to talk about those as well?
Yes, so essentially it requires the Ohio Treasurer of State to pay the annual account fees for all stable account holders. This change does not change the asset-based fees, and we don't actually see those come out of the account. They just don't go into the account. And I think in some cases, or in most cases, money in a stable account is not able to be subject to a Medicaid estate recovery when someone passes away. So this means that people will be able to use the stable account without necessarily having to worry about when they pass away, their heirs would be able to go through the normal probate process to be able to access that money. And then it also ensures that personal information, including the account details, are not public record. And so it protects the confidentiality of that information.
Absolutely. And these are such amazing changes. It's kind of fun that, when I meet with families previously or met with them, the one thing people didn't like about the stable accounts was the Medicaid estate recovery. And now that that is like out of the picture, it's like, what is going to be the negative now? Because honestly, I can't think of any. I can't. Which is awesome. So yeah, I love that these changes happen. Thank you for going through those, Nate. Um, and then I, so resources, just to kind of recap this resource issue, it's wild to me when I meet with families who get a letter that say, you know what, you were over resources for 6 months in a row. And I think that people don't get communication regularly from Social Security saying, like, this is how much we see you have in resources. So when you get these letters on an ongoing basis, individuals and families just assume that everything's okay. And if I have too much money in my account, well, maybe it doesn't actually count as a resource, is what I've heard from a lot of families. But in so many cases where I've seen very large overpayments, it's heartbreaking when I meet with them and I see, oh, well, you had, $3,000 in your bank accounts for 6 months in a row, but you have a stable account. And if you just would have been putting that excess funds in the stable account on an ongoing basis, it could have eliminated all of that issue. And so I cannot stress how important what Nate said about the first moment of the month is when SSI counts resources. So literally, they're going to pull bank balances on the first moment of the month, and that's what they go off of. And the exception to that is, if SSI funds get deposited on the last day of the month, they're going to subtract that from that balance because they know, okay, we gave that to you. That's our fault. But make sure if you have SSI folks, make sure the last week of the month, like right now, is perfect time for all of our SSI folks in the world to look at their balances because they could set up a deposit to a stable account to happen in the next, usually it's 5 business days that you want to allow for those transfers to happen. So now is the best time at the end of the month to check those resources just to make sure you're under those limits. Because like I said, Social Security catches that stuff during those reviews. So use those stable accounts and save that money in the right place. So there's a huge myth out there that people think I can't work because I'm going to lose my benefits, right? We've gone through this a lot of times in all of our different trainings. It's just we need to make sure we are conveying information to Social Security when we're working because I've seen a lot of people work full time and they're getting special help. And, they're not going to count, by they, I mean Social Security, they're not going to count all of that income from working if there's extra things happening. But Social Security doesn't know about those extra things until we report it. And these extra things are called work incentives. So we do just want to kind of highlight what those actual work incentives are. And with SSI, Supplemental Security Income, there are specific work incentives with that program. And they're the student earned income exclusion, impairment related work expenses, blind work expenses, and a plan for achieving self-support. And then when someone's on SSDI or Social Security Disability Insurance or childhood disability benefits, these are the work incentives that apply to them. And it's a trial work period. And it's an extended period of eligibility. And it's the impairment related work expenses, subsidies, and special conditions. And again, we have whole webinars about all of those. So we're not going to talk about them. But we just want people to know this is what you have to report for those. So if somebody's a student and they're on SSI, eligible for that student earned income exclusion, they need to send a letter to Social Security with those wages saying, I am a student, fully enrolled. This is where I'm going. The letter should come from the school that they're attending, saying that they're a full-time student for whatever school year it is. And that needs to be submitted to Social Security to make sure that that gets applied to their earnings. On the other side of that, they also should report when they're no longer a student. They should send something saying, hey, I graduated. This doesn't apply to me anymore. I've actually run into some issues with that work incentive of student earned income exclusion going on for longer than it should because of that lack of knowledge from Social Security didn't know that they graduated because they were still under the age of 22. IRWEs, you can report that information. Nate, do you want to talk a little bit about IRWEs and how to report?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So IRWEs are impairment related work expenses, and they're a way for Social Security to deduct recipients and beneficiaries might spend on medically related things that they need to work. And in my case, A bigger we for me was purchasing an accessible vehicle because I couldn't use public transportation where I lived, and I needed some flexibility with my transportation option based on how I worked in order to get to and from work. And so purchasing an accessible vehicle that was modified for me and my large electric wheelchair was something that the Social Security Administration documented as an early with detailed notes of the configuration and also receipts, purchase orders, and things like that that they needed to prove that I paid for it. And both of those pieces are really important. You know, if it's a medication, you might need something from the pharmacy plus receipts from the pharmacy in order to document the expense. I think every IRWI is potentially unique in terms of what the specific documentation looks like, but it is important, you know, if you think something might be an impairment related work expense to, you know, make sure you keep those receipts and take a picture of them so that you have a backup and keep something describing what it is so that when you are filling out work activity reports or otherwise working with the Social Security Administration to document the impairment related work expenses, you have more of the evidence to get that counted and put into your record.
Absolutely. Thank you, Nate. Subsidy forms are not something that comes to the individual, but those will often get submitted to an employer to fill out. So it's the employer's responsibility at that point, but we can submit them as well for folks that we know are getting help. And then the work activity report is a big one because that goes out to families and representative payees, and that just needs to be turned back in to Social Security by the time frame to make sure that information is reported to them. Cindy's going to kind of guide us a little bit through what a representative payee is. Take it away, Cindy.
Yes. Is this better? Can you hear me better?
Yes.
Oh, good. Thank you
Yes.
for bringing that to my awareness. So, yes, so I love the topic of representative payee. The next two slides are just going to be a quick overview of some of those roles and responsibilities. But on the Social Security website that's provided in this slide, the Social Security has provided a packet called the Role of the Authorized Representative. And so that is great guidance for any representative to fully know what the role and responsibilities are and what they can and cannot do. So I highly recommend, if Social Security does not provide that to you directly when you're awarded this role, to go and check that out on their website. So I'm going to refer to a representative payee in the next slide as a rep payee. It's just a little bit shorter version of that. Can you go back to the first slide again? Okay, thank you. So Social Security assumes that anybody who's receiving funds is able to manage their own funds themselves unless it has been discovered that the individual does need assistance in handling and managing the allocation and receiving of their supplemental income every month. So minors, according to Social Security, they do not believe they can manage their money. So anybody who's applying to be a rep payee, a person, agency, or an organization must be the age of 18 or older. Social Security will appoint that payee to manage the benefits for an individual who cannot manage them independently. The appointment is by application. So anybody can apply to be an individual's rep payee. Being a guardian or having a power of attorney, that does not automatically grant you the role as a rep payee. Those two roles of a POA or a guardian, that's a legal role that's much broader than what an authorized rep payee is actually responsible for. And their sole responsibility is to manage the Social Security funds alone. A guardian or rep payee or POA, you're free if you are both of those roles to apply. Anybody can. If you are a guardian and you have the authority, please know what your parameters are as a POA or a guardian. And if you have that role that you can appoint or remove a rep payee. If you don't want to apply to one yourselves, And then you can work with the individual and seek out guidance with your SSA and see other agencies or other friends or families that might want to uphold that role. And if you have the legal authority, you can sign off on the application for that rep payee to manage their Social Security funds. It's really important that communication, once a rep payee has been established, if there's a guardian or POA in place, that you really communicate with one another so you have an idea of how it's going with the rep payee who's managing those funds. Because again, the guardian approves and can remove the rep payee. And unless you have that communication with them, you really don't know how it's going. And keep in mind, the guardian doesn't have authorization over those Social Security funds. That's the rep payee. But please keep that communication going. And so you all are working collectively for those allocation of those benefits. A payee's main duties is to oversee those benefits to meet immediate needs, such as living expenses or medical expenses outside of what insurance will pay for. But it's also whatever's left over is to be allocated according to the individual's needs if they want to participate recreationally, or most importantly, to save for future needs. And that's where stable accounts are really important to kind of set aside some money for future planning for that individual or something special like a vacation or maybe even a future medical need that they might have. So a rep payee is responsible for opening a rep payee bank account. So these bank accounts look different than the standard checking and savings account. When you apply for this role with Social Security, they vet you and they approve and appoint you as a rep payee. They're going to communicate that appointment through a letter. And they're just stating that they've approved you to be operating as a rep payee for that individual. I encourage you to contact the bank of your choice prior to opening a bank account. Usually, a bank account only requires that approval letter in order to open a rep payee account, but there might be a bank who might require maybe more information. Although we tend to see just the letter alone is enough, but I want to make sure you're confident before you go out to that appointment that it's productive and you're actually going to get that bank account opened when you go. So you're going to take the letter, you're going to open up a rep payee account, and once the bank opens that, they're very well versed in this language to open that account. They're going to give you a letter that's going to have the routing number and the bank account for that particular bank, and then you're going to take that to Social Security and you're going to file it with them. And it's important that that step is done quickly because that's the account that that direct deposit is going to go into, and so you can begin your role in allocating those funds for that person. Commingling is not allowed with Social Security with rep payees and individuals. This looks different if you are married and you have two married partners sharing. That is not considered commingling. And it's not considered commingling if you're a rep payee for a minor. But once that individual turns 18, part of that redetermination when they're turning 18 is determine if they still need a rep payee as they're entering adulthood. And if they do, and you're appointed as that role into adulthood, it's important to have their own bank account. And so that is kept separately. And another reason that's so important is, as we discussed, for reporting assets and resources, if they are receiving SSI and there's commingling of funds, anything in that bank account their name is on will be considered their asset and resource and could directly affect not only their eligibility with Social Security, but maybe their eligibility if they're receiving Medicaid as well. So it's really important, and we encourage all rep payees to really understand what those reporting standards are, but also understand for that individual other sources that they're receiving in the community, such as Medicaid, that those reporting and assets could also determine eligibility factors. Payees are required to keep records of all expenses. Having a bank account is really easy to do that. Receipts, ledgers, however you see fitting, and keeping those records. We do have Social Security that will reach out and when it says requesting a report, they're referring to a yearly report that they will send to all rep payees, whether you're an individual rep payee or work through an agency or an organization. And what they're inquiring about is they will let you know what that individual received that whole year in benefits. And then they're going to ask you, how were those benefits dispersed? How much was saved and how much was sent out on living expenses? There is an exception For some rep payees who are related to that individual and living with them, they may be exempt in completing that yearly report. You may still get a letter, and if you do and you feel you fall under that exemption, we encourage you still to reach out to your local office, let them know you received that letter, and confirm that you are exempt in completing that letter. And keep in mind, if you are exempt from completing the yearly report, you're not exempt from any redeterminations or audits Social Security may require of you to assist the person. Rep payees are responsible for reporting all changes. And as was discussed earlier, those change of addresses, that's across the board, no matter what the individual is receiving. Living arrangements, especially if you're receiving SSI, that includes who's moving into the home and who's moving out. We covered that somebody receiving Social Security benefits, what are the living expenses, how many people live in the home, and that can maybe change how much they receive. So Social Security, we need to know who's living in the home and who's moving out, that kind of thing. And then marriages, they do require you to report if there's a marriage and also if there's a separation. That is a requirement to report as well. And we covered it a little bit before, but communication with the rep payee is so crucial with guardians and POAs because part of those reporting standards is also if there's an inheritance, a rep payee should know if that's happening because that's something that would be required to report. And sometimes a guardian or family member is doing estate planning and they might have accounts that are open. A rep payee is not authorized to oversee any of those things, but they should be aware of that for reporting standards, depending on what the individual is receiving and what those reporting requirements fall under. Next slide, please. Appeals. Appeals can be very scary. They're not meant to be. They can be scary and they can be frustrating, to be very honest, but you have a lot of support when that happens. So you're never going to be alone when an appeal happens. And Paula had great letters that kind of tells you what those letters look like in the beginning language so you know what to expect. You do have 60 days to an appeal, but the 60 days does not start the date of the letter. Social Security has a 5-day built-in timeline. They are assuming it takes up to 5 days for you to receive that letter. So the 60-day timeline actually starts 5 days from the date of the letter. And you have numerous ways to appeal. So the appeal part of the decision is going to be towards the end of the letter that you receive, where it talks about your right to appeal and ways that you can pursue appealing. The actual decision is always found at the beginning of the letter. So it's really important when you're reading that and you're seeing if there's been a change for the individual. If you decide an appeal is appropriate, then your appeal is going to be based on that decision. So an example of that would be if there's an overpayment, you would not appeal and give them medical documentation. You would appeal and provide financial information or check stubs, that kind of thing that would align with what they're saying the overpayment or the decision would be. And then, of course, you have numerous chances to continue to overappeal that decision in favor of the individual.
Thank you, Cindy. So I don't know if anyone on this call has used the Social Security website, but I honestly am on it every day. I think it's quite helpful that there is a lot that you can do online. And you don't actually have to be the individual submitting an appeal online. When you go to their website, which is just ssa.gov, you can log in to an account that you might have, which I think they want people to do. But there is also an option when you go to appeal that you can put that you're submitting the appeal for someone else. So a representative payee can submit it, a friend can submit it, and basically anyone can submit that appeal for someone. So I think it's important to keep that in mind because of that 60-day time frame. Anyone submitting the appeal is better than nobody submitting an appeal. And so getting it in the system, I cannot stress enough that is so important. So, I mean, as an SSA, because a lot of you on here are SSAs, you can sit with the person you're supporting and say that you're, helping them with that and submit the appeal online with them. That is 100% okay. I would rather that happen than an appeal not get submitted in a timely manner. So how do we make sure things go right? And I think this is the most important thing that we want everyone to remember today, is it's important for people to understand what benefits they're getting. That is probably the most common thing that goes wrong. People don't know. They don't know what they're getting, and that's not any fault of their own. It's because letters are confusing. JFS letters, Social Security letters, everything is complicated. So just try to help people understand what benefits they're getting. And if they don't know, hook them up with a benefits planner to help them find those actual verifications of benefits, or look at the letters that they have. And then know the reporting requirements for each benefit program you receive. And then reporting to Social Security and Job and Family Services is different. They are two different agencies, and they both need the information in a lot of cases. And I don't know how many times, because I get a lot of copies of letters for people from JFS, for cases I've helped with. And I've gotten letters for Medicaid specifically that say your Medicaid was automatically renewed. And then maybe like a week later, it'll say, we need you to complete this form for your Medicaid. And so just keep in mind, even if you get something saying, hey, things were renewed, if later you get a form saying we need this completed, send the form back. I cannot stress the importance enough of sending paper back to them. If they send it out to you, they probably need it back. And if they don't need it, they're going to just set it aside and say, oh, we got it, but we don't really need this. But a lot of times it's the folks who are on Medicaid waivers who get that secondary form that does need to be completed for the waiver. The actual Medicaid SSI maybe is why they get Medicaid. That could be approved, but the waiver sometimes needs that extra form. Communicate effectively with your payee. Like Cindy said, you know, it is the payee's they're responsible for reporting, but what they don't know, they can't report. So make sure you're communicating information with your payee so that they can get it to Social Security. And always, 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 some communication is better than no communication. And like Christine said earlier, keep a document documenting when you talk to people. It is really important to write down, I called Social Security at 2:26 p.m. on Wednesday, August 27th, and I spoke with this person, and this is what they told me. So write that down. Keep copies of documents. I think it was Nate that said, keep the copy, take a picture of a receipt, because we all know receipts fade. I might lose my papers, but if I keep electronic copies of stuff, it's probably going to be there for a while, right? So keep copies. If you don't have physical space to keep copies, keep it electronically. And then meet those timeframes for sending in information. I get JFS letters that say, we need this information in 10 days. And I got the letter 7 days after the letter was sent. So then now I only have 3 days. But what I do is send them something saying, hey, I got this. I'm going to get this bank statement for you. I just need a couple more days. So sending that usually gives them at least the indication you're working on it to meet that time frame, and they'll give you a little bit extra time. And then if you don't agree with something, appeal. Submit the appeal on time. And I always run into people who are like, well, we don't know if we want to appeal. And honestly, what's the worst thing that can happen? Maybe they say no. Okay, but at least we had more time, right? And maybe it'll give us time to figure out that their information is not accurate. So if you don't remember anything today, just remember these are the things that you need to do to make sure things go right. So hopefully we hit it all for you.
So we hope you will join us for the next episode where we will do a deeper dive into benefits analysis. We do not yet have the date and time confirmed, so stay tuned. You'll see it come out through OACB and Memo Monday once we get those details confirmed with the flyer and registration and all of that good stuff. So thank you to our amazing panelists, our superstars today, for all of the amazing information that you provided. Certainly provides a lot more confidence in knowing the next steps.